Okay, here we go. Hopefully the audio is good enough. If anybody shows up early enough to hear me ask, go ahead and let me know if the audio is good enough or not. And I have to go this way then. Come on, here we go. Oh, we have to go out here first. Yes, to turn this on. Then we go into the control room and we wait and and we wait some more. Okay. And I'm already auto muted. That's good. Let's get everything ready here. Anybody watching the recording afterwards, you could probably skip to the 5 or 6 minute mark. I don't know for certain. Hope I clicked on the right Google Earth. Is it this one? Okay, it's this one. Come on. I can get these up as well. All right, and obviously switch this to live. Uh, I'll open that folder when the time comes for it. Okay, so 2 minutes in, so 4 minutes till I actually start for real then. So let me drink some water before starting this time. Okay, and I'm not certain of the order I want to go through stuff in, so I guess I'll just invent that in the moment when the time comes for it. Also, oh wait, no, I can't actually show those because I haven't actually screenshotted them yet. But I've started working on, as I said, an additional set of graphs that will be in the Google Doc that everyone can access. You just go to any videos in like the most recent 20 or so that I've posted, then in the description, there's always the link along with my PayPal and Patreon stuff if you want to support me, only if you actually can. Then there's also free to access graphs and resources Drive folder with all these different Google Docs for anybody who's never seen them before that have all kinds of graphs and data compilations. And even in the case of this one, like essay write ups about why certain stuff is happening or has been happening. So among these, I'm about to also add one with percent population employed graphs, not unemployment rate graphs because plenty of those already exist, but those are unemployment percentage is a percent of your of your working age population who is actively looking for employment but has been unable to find employment is what an unemployment percentage number actually means. So the graphs that I hold on a second. Sorry about that. The graphs that I am making are total, just flat out percentage of your population that is working age in some kind of job. And usually Usually, even if theoretically you had everybody working who legally could, between 18 and say 70, you most likely would only get up to like somewhere in the 60s percentile because a decent percentage of your population is going to be children and also elderly people who really can't exactly work anymore. But in reality, mostly you'll find the ceiling that you can get to and that most countries want to aim for is a bit above 50% or so. Because if you have, 50% of your population is people who are earning some kind of income and thus, A, are getting taxed for it and generating government revenue that can be spent on public services, and also are then spending that income that they earn to fuel the economy, which also then helps fuel everything else as well. Then, obviously, if you have 50% or more who are doing that, then that kind of is basically a guarantee that you can effectively support the less than 50% who are not, who are either elderly, children, disabled, or simply are unable to find a job at the moment. So you'll be able to see those graphs and you'll see, some countries, like a lot of countries in Europe and the US and Canada, wobble around between the upper 40s and low 50s. And you'll see some nations that have been rapidly rising, like say Malaysia and Vietnam. You'll see them climb slowly from being down in like the low 30s in the past, sometimes even down in the 20s, up towards 50, or in Vietnam's case, they've already gotten over 50%. And then you'll be seeing other countries that have not had the best time, like say South Africa, who is actually still below 30% of its population is adults who are receiving some kind of income. And they've fluctuated up and down with the country's different failures over the course of time. And they have bumped up into the 30s and gone to like the mid 30s a few times, but then they keep dropping back down. And right now they're on their way down through the upper 20s, heading down to around, I think, only 25 or 26% of the country's population is some form of working person. All right, that should bring us, oh, actually overtime, like I always do. Uh, Nobody else for the time being. Oh well, people who miss stuff can just rewind and catch what they missed. So I will cover a few random things uh, to give a few more minutes for people, and then I will start the actual stuff. So let me see what I want to do with these. Okay. Well, since I mentioned, at least I thought I mentioned Thailand. Thailand, uh, new updated information coming out from their vital statistics bureau, or whatever they call theirs in particular. They've confirmed now their birth rate, their fertility rate has officially fallen below 1. They are now down to 0.96, joining a small but unfortunately rapidly growing club that's now most recently also includes China at 0.98, includes Taiwan as well, around 0.86, I think, includes South Korea as its number one at 0.7, 0.7 something, and one that there was somebody else I think I'm forgetting who was down like at 0.91 or something like that. but I do not recall off the top. Oh yeah, Singapore. I forgot Singapore. Singapore is at like 0.91. So uh, East Asia and now Southeast Asia as well are the ones who have been nosediving the fastest. Some other countries in Europe, particularly like Spain, are really eager to catch up to East Asia. Uh, Ukraine actually is also circumstantially below one. However, that would not presently be the case were it not for, you know, Russia's whole imperial restoration ambition. They would be Otherwise they would be pretty low, but they would still be around like 1.2 or around that area. And others who, but those over there, back over in East Asia, don't have that excuse. Obviously, neither does Spain. No one's invading you at the moment. Spain, not sure what's going on with you. And I believe Italy also has now taken an even bigger drop, closer to 1.1 as well. You guys don't exactly have any excuse either. And whoa, what are you doing? Excuse me, reset yourself, please. And even Canada now is down to like 1.2, and Chile is under 1.2 and is at, as of their most recent data over the last several months indicates a continuing further drop from like 1.18 down to 1.12. So, and Argentina's not that far behind them. Argentina's at like 1.25 or something like that. So it is no longer an isolated East Asia thing. And everyone previously like constantly, assumed Africa and Islamic countries would never do such a thing. However, that's not the case. Even they are heading in that direction. The UAE is all the way down to like 1.1. Saudi Arabia is one of the ones, is among the rich Persian Gulf nations. Saudi Arabia, I think, is the one that's still the highest. But they're only up at 1.8 or 1.7. Iran, even as like radically Islamic as it is down at 1.5 or 1.6. Whereas before the last 2 years happened that caused it to nosedive, they were also still already down to 1.8. And even Turkey is now down to between 1.5 and 1.6. And numerous nations in Africa, like Kenya is one, and I believe Ghana is the other. The two that I can recall off the top of my head are now actually down close to like 2.5, or we'll be getting close to 2.5 very soon. Botswana and South Africa are already around a flat 2, with South Africa on a not as quick as an East Asian drop, but South Africa is continuing to head its way downwards. And it looks like they'll be dropping at uh, 0.05 per year from this point forward. And Tanzania, I believe, is going down pretty quickly and will be heading under 3 within like the next year or two. So it is really everywhere. There is no one who's like actually outside of it. There are countries that appear outside of it only because their starting numbers before they began rapidly heading down were already so high, like Niger or the Congo. They were up at like, 6 children per woman, and they only just recently, over the last like decade and a half, started their decline. So because they were already so high in number, they're obviously still much higher than most other countries right now. However, they are also heading down decently sloped hills. But that was more than just Thailand. Uh, I originally intended that to be just Thailand, but that bought us some time. Seems to have fallen fast very quickly. I have I have theirs with their prior data. They were already down to 1.06. I think it should be in populations. TFR. Let's see what their fall looked like. Thailand. There we go. Okay. Oh yeah, they fell a while ago down to about two, and then once they crossed into the new millennium, they dropped a bit further under replacement. But it looks like they were up at like 1.8 or something, and they stayed pretty steady there for a while. 2010s looks like they had a gradual slope until post 2020. They took a harsher dive, leveled out for like 1 year, and that's as of the start of 2024, it was looking like 1.06. However, now as we've gone through the first several months of this year, the number of children born has taken a decently sharper drop than was expected from in comparison to the numbers last year. So I'll have to actually change that to the new 0.96. But Thailand was actually already decently down, and they've been at or below replacement rate for actually over 3 decades now. But if we do, that's 0 to 2. So yeah, right there looks like they were a bit under 1.5, maybe like 1.4 before this sudden post 2020 drop. Okay, where's Google Earth? Google Earth. Okay, so now I'll go into one of the actual things. I'll have to switch notebook pages over here. So, the conflict in Gaza continues, with Israel now kind of backed into the realization that they, after initially, surprising and impressing me during week 1 of the post October 7th stuff, and primarily doing like precision strikes, they then, just went full massacre mode and started carpet bombing the entire highly densely populated strip. Now they were forced into kind of the realization that they've carpet bombed the whole thing into oblivion, and it didn't work. So, all they did was, massacre a bunch of people. But, Hamas was underground in tunnels. So, the more shallow, closer to surface tunnels obviously would probably collapse. But there, would have been quite a number of survivors in there. So eventually they realized they were going to have to go in and do stuff. And they did that first with Gaza itself, then with Khan Yunis, and now they're doing it with Rafah. And they've been going through for the past week or two. I was going to say one, but I realized I missed a whole reporting week last week. So there's been fighting with the Hamas remnants in Rafah. Vague, very rough estimates are probably half of Hamas is dead, and uh, several thousand more on top of that 20,000 are probably severely injured to some extent, to which they're not really going to be able to like leave the tunnels or do anything. But like precise numbers of how many remain out of the original 40,000 fighters is unknown. But uh, they were waiting for this final bit here, which has started, and they had worn down most of their rocket reserves, the small unguided rockets that they launched. They had about 30,000 when everything started, and they launched around like 27,000 of them before they basically went quiet for the last few months. And it looks like they were saving the last 2 or 3 thousand of them for this fight right here, because they've been using a new tactic of waiting until waiting until specific like formations of the IDF come in to a place where they have stuff set up, and they wait in like the rubble or in a tunnel entrance if one survived. And once there's a once the initial tanks and like more armored vehicles pass, and then the lesser armored vehicles that are primarily just infantry mobility vehicles and logistics support vehicles, along with infantry on foot accompanying them, pass by. Then they, instead of launching the rockets like up in a trajectory to go out and hit some target in Israel, they launch them basically horizontally down the street or across the street uh, to to hit the like groups on foot or to hit the lesser armored vehicles as they're in there. So that has seen a big bump up in IDF casualties, and the IDF plays, despite being more along, the IDF plays more of the Russian game of not really admitting to casualties unless they kind of don't have any other choice, or unless it's kind of like uh, been already like too public. They've admitted to several dozen, but it's more or likely somewhere between 100 and 200 over the last several days in Rafah, and also now additional ones up here in the Golan occupation zone, where I've told you guys previously that Israel is trying to work on clearing the minefields in this area so that they can throw force up here, most likely to come in through this like valley pass and do their not invasion, but quote unquote attack maneuver. Oops, sorry, no, uh, up here is the Golan occupation zone. Uh, I was looking at dotted lines when I was supposed to be looking for the solid line that denotes Lebanon. So they, again, as everybody seems to be doing now, first special military operation, and China's going to call theirs, a peaceful reunification, I don't know, parade or whatever. Israel is calling their upcoming invasion of Lebanon, or at least southern Lebanon, simply an attack maneuver, or sorry, a strategical attack maneuver. And Turkey, called their invasion of northern Syria a creating a safety zone. So everyone wants to weasel out of invading places by just not using the word invasion, as if that somehow changes things. But they've been trying to clear the minefields in this pass up here, and one of the groups was ambushed once a couple weeks back. However, the frequency of that has been increasing, probably because they're getting closer to clearing paths through the minefields. They're probably getting closer to completion. So Hezbollah has performed several more ambushes here. Again, getting dudes like up on the hills around like the narrow pass area, and firing down on most likely the mine clearing and engineering vehicles, because that would be the most strategic ones to hit. But they have also been looking for any just regular personnel or infantry that are either accompanying vehicles on foot or are outside of the vehicles and gathered in a group for some reason in an exposed area, and have been firing on them with anti-tank munitions as well. So the IDF has been taking casualties from that, and the Islamic Revolution over in Syria did manage to get a couple, and I mean literally a couple, as in two, uh, of Iran's older cruise missiles smuggled to them through northern Iraq, and they launched those at the pass where the demining operations was going on, and those hit and lit up a number of vehicles and caused some count of casualties. And Israel has really upped the whole area softening, not strategic bombing, but strategy. They're basically just running, I would assume, Heron drones over the area and watching any form of Hamas motion and looking for any isolated building like up in the hills that they go into, and then emerge with like rocket launchers after going into the building. And they've been bombing basically every said building that they see, and there have been like dozens of hits of that now. And the stack up of casualties on Hezbollah's side is probably getting closer to around 2,000 now. Not likely at it just yet, but is probably getting close. However, unlike with Hamas, that's not really a significant number in their direction because Hezbollah is much larger, around roughly around 100,000 dudes, or at least is assumed, potentially up to 150, but not entirely certain. And the number of Islamic Revolution dudes, at least in the Syria portion, is estimated to be around 40,000, or was. It's probably a bit smaller now because a couple hundred have been killed on like cross-border artillery fire back and forth with the IDF on the Syrian border with the Golan region. But so that's the general like layout of stuff now. Other than that, the noise level has kind of gone down, and despite the IDF uh, bombing all of the early warning radars throughout Syria and literally bombing stuff inside of Iran, Iran has not, at least yet, backed up their threat to launch another massive ballistic and cruise missile barrage. They might still do it, but uncertain. As I mean, it looked initially like they were backing down from the first one, but then they suddenly did it. So they might end up actually doing that. And do we have anything else in here? Oh, yeah. Speaking of Turkey, they already did the first portion of what they want in northern Syria. Now, all of a sudden, like everybody else, they seem like they might be intending to jump ahead of schedule by a number of years. So initially, I was thinking, all right, they're probably going to wait for something to break out between Azerbaijan and Iran, either by Azerbaijan invading Armenia and Iran coming to Azerbaijan's defense, or by Azerbaijan retaliating against Iran for the treatment of Azeri people in northwestern Iran. And then when that war breaks out, Turkey will come in on Azerbaijan's side and use that as their excuse to go to war with Iran and knock Iran out. However, now it looks like they're jumping a bit ahead, and they've been making, although again it might just be rhetoric. With Erdogan, I don't really know. He's kind of more. Uh, he's kind of a bit more all over the place in terms of the will he won't he stuff, because he's been uh, he's been conducting more airstrikes in northern Iraq against the Kurdish than he's on under the table paper allowed to, because Iraq does let Turkey do it, but there is like kind of an under the table agreement on like to what extent they're allowed to do it before it would become too humiliating. And even without their capability to really do anything, Baghdad would feel they have to do something. So he's been overstepping the unspoken agreement of how much he's allowed to do in northern Iraq. And he's then, when he was told this by Baghdad, uh, Erdogan or Ankara responded that actually it's not enough. And they are considering the real possibility that they may have to launch a strategic operation into northern Iraq. You know, like ground forces and everything. Not an invasion, though. You know, it's just a strategic operation. Okay, well, that one's like over 10 years ahead of schedule. The Iran thing isn't as much ahead of schedule, but it is a bit ahead of schedule because he also has now he's also now been passing off official notices to Tehran that he is really displeased with how little they're doing against quote unquote Kurdish militants in Iran, despite the fact that Iran oppresses the Kurdish people just fine. To don't try to get into a pissing contest with them about that. Uh, but he now has threatened Iran with like if you don't push down on them, you know, as much as I want you to, we might have to do it ourselves, implying that you know Turkey might also bomb stuff in Iran. I mean, not specifically Iranian stuff. Technically, it would be Kurdish stuff in the Kurdistan region of Iran. But you know, that's like that's really jumping the gun and seems more like maybe he doesn't want to wait around anymore, and he wants to I would assume do that to basically kind of trigger Iran into doing stuff back, which then he could then spin into a okay, let's start the war excuse. And I'm not really sure what the angle would be with that. Like, Turkey does want Iran to die by all means, because that's one less regional power to compete with. But I was like starting to think that they might sit back a bit. And if Iran, you know, was dumb enough to keep retaliating against Israel, and eventually, you know, cause Israel and by proxy, eventually the U.S. to do some kind of mass aerial bombing campaign inside of Iran, that he would kind of just, you know, sit back and let that happen, since that would effectively destroy Iran as well. But now I'm not sure. Maybe the narcissism is coming through, and he wants it to make sure that no, it's Turkey who knocks Iran off the chessboard. Like I guess just as a grandstanding move to, you know, kind of really like, you know, chest beatingly assert Turkey's role as a military power. Uh, but that's what he's been up to for the last month or so. Uh, Again, uncertain whether he's actually going to back any of that up, but we'll see when and if it happens, I guess. And one other thing before we'll break off into uh, economic stuff and also the Brazil stuff. India, you know, speaking of countries that are trying to assert themselves as military powers of varying, you know, power levels, India might just be flexing right now. So they, at the same time as us, Japan, South Korea, uh, Taiwan, not, you know, officially, but physically they're there. The Philippines and Australia are all having meetings and doing joint naval exercises around the Philippines to get cooperation and coordination ready for what we know is coming. Uh, High probability next year. You know, at the same time that this is happening, officially on paper, you know, denying that their trip over to the Philippines has anything to do with it, and they're not participating in anything. India has sent over several warships, several frigates and destroyers of their own. You know, coincidentally at the same time. So this is starting a moment. Somebody somebody might be secretly signing on to the to the, let's crush China when it tries to make its move, uh, you know, gang curb stomp agreement, basically. So, although, a small part, I mean, it would depend on how much force they threw into it, but, potentially only playing a small part, but India might wants to like be a part of it when it happens, like, you know, just to like, kind of assert themselves as a military power and, go down in history as saying they were there, they were part of it. So, India's, doing a bit of a flex here and covertly might actually be signing on to this whole thing since they have nothing. They're like the only other country on like the, either superpowers or former wannabe superpowers or potential superpowers list. They're the only one that has like nothing the US, would be against them for. Whereas everybody else, either has something against us already in Russia and China's cases, which, thus has us against them, or in Turkey's case, intends to start pulling stuff, the whole Neo Ottoman Empire thing that Erdogan wants, that would inevitably push us against him. Uh, so the only like player who is against in any kind of like threat to India in any way is, really China. So, India might want to be throwing themselves in here since this whole debacle is coming up very soon to, play their part in, just like Turkey wants to do with Iran, knocking China off the chessboard, so that India, from their standpoint, has really no one around them that's like threatening them in any way whatsoever, other than Pakistan. But Pakistan is not remotely a threat in the way that China is. And also, Pakistan's kind of going to be, internally buckling rather shortly, and actually has already done so off and on. So that's going on their part. Uh, Nothing I have to respond to. Okay, so that's everything in that regard, and then we'll go to further Russia-Ukraine developments after the midsection stuff. So going through the middle section, as usual, various economic developments. Nigeria is continuing to finally, slowly recover their oil production as the government transferred ownership from their state run oil industry, which is almost always the most inefficient thing ever, to one of the actual major oil companies, and said, actually competent oil company, oil major, was, to the surprise of no one, able to actually, repair all of the various dilapidated pipelines and infrastructure in, a matter of a couple of months, and boosted them back up by an extra 200,000. And they now have also had a field expansion, upping the capacity of a field by about 40,000 barrels per day. And finally, for the first time in a while, a new field has been brought into production. And that one will be jumping up to about 40,000. So they should start consistently be staying back around 1.4 or sometimes down to 1.3. And uh, the military has been going really hard with patrols across the various oil pipeline networks to uh, both catch people in the act and bust up the actual groups that are doing it. All of the pipeline taps and siphoning operations that effectively have, up until recently, been drawing an average of about 200,000 barrels per day illegally out of the pipelines. So they've gotten that down by 100,000 so far, but there's still about 100,000 barrels per day of theft going on that they're working on getting shut down. And also, they have just opened another round of oil and gas exploration for companies to snatch blocks up. some more offshore, as they do still have some offshore area that has not been touched yet. But decent bit is now onshore in this onshore delta region here, as there is onshore stuff already, but further inland, no. Whereas further inland, there is likely a decent bit more stuff. As you follow the low basin that the rivers go through until the rivers split up here, and then they go through more narrow channels in each direction, but those will still also likely have a decent bit of oil and gas. And also, they've finally been able to reset a lot of their actual gas production stuff. So they're now up to producing the 6 billion cubic feet per day that they're actually capable of, as opposed to the only 4 billion cubic feet per day that they were stuck at for a while. And also coming into the realm of finally doing more new oil and gas exploration is the UK, whereas they've explored almost all of this except for right here. If you were to do like a U shape out here, this section has remained not really touched. So basically, do a much smaller arc around here, and that's the area that will be staying not touched at the moment. Whereas the outer portion of the U that I previously drew, that is now being auctioned off to exploration bidders. So oil and gas exploration will be taking place in that section soon, and that will yield stuff eventually over the next several years. And then after that, the only real places the UK has left is over here, and then bits of up here that they haven't touched yet. So about 70% of what's up here. There is a chance of stuff down here, but it's more narrow and also is less likely. Whereas Norway, for example, still has this decent bit here. Still, they've explored about like 25% of this area, so they still have all this, and then this fan portion that stretches off from it. And then they have their entire Barents Sea region, and even places around Svalbard if they ever go up there. So the UK is kind of approaching the end of the line in terms of what's actually available to them, but they are going forward with some more oil and gas exploration finally. And Kazakhstan, as I said last time, the work on a field expansion is being completed that will next year see their production boost by 260,000 barrels per day. So they should go from 1.9 or a bit under 1.9 up to a bit above 2.1 by the end of next year or so. And also, they, like many other countries, are now finally installing the capture infrastructure to actually capture and produce their natural gas that accompanies the oil from their oil fields, as opposed to just flaring it. And if you're wondering, were so many countries really just flaring all of this gas all this time? The answer is yeah, because natural gas consumption was, until the last like 15 years or so, natural gas consumption never really was as high as capable production levels would be. Now, however, they're pushing against each other and they're almost neck and neck. So now everyone who has just been flaring gas all this time is starting to actually capture and produce their natural gas. So Kazakhstan, by the end of this decade, will go from their current 2 billion cubic feet per day up to about 6 billion cubic feet per day. And they should be able to hold that 6 for a few decades after that. And also in line with natural gas, we have more natural gas discoveries. Up here off of northern Sumatra, as Indonesia continues with new oil and gas exploration, which they hadn't been doing for a while until the last few years. And they've already found several things down here and up here that should be enough for them to go up from 6 to probably about 8 billion cubic feet per day over the next few years, now potentially up to 9, because this new field that was found recently looks like it should have the capability to have its initial starting surge production for its first 10 years be somewhere between half a billion cubic feet and a flat 1 billion cubic feet per day. So, possibility over the next 5 to 10 years, they'll be going up to 9. Most likely, more discoveries are going to follow, though. So, just like Malaysia, they're probably going to be going up to and over 10 billion cubic feet per day. Oh, and since we're right there, speaking of Malaysia, Malaysia is already the site of several new computer processor or silicon semiconductor wafer manufacturing plants that will be starting up relatively soon to again move production capacity out from Taiwan to more diverse locations before it happens, most likely next year. Malaysia is one of those locations. I believe two are under construction there. One already is in operation, and two are being built. I'm not sure when those two are supposed to be done, but also just in further economic high-end product boost for Malaysia, they also now are starting work on a manufacturing plant to that will be producing the complex machinery that is used by and involved in semiconductor manufacturing plants. So the machinery and the technology and stuff used to make the semiconductors in those factories will also now be getting made, or at least some portion of the world's supply, at a factory that will be in Malaysia. Zoom out here. Heading back over to the Middle East, Iraq. Since we were speaking about finally capturing and producing otherwise flared gas, Iraq is now up to around 3.5 billion cubic feet per day of actual gas production, as opposed to previously only being around 1 just a few years ago. And they are continuing their work on installing, the capturing infrastructure to capture the and produce the other segment of their gas that is otherwise still being flared. And in terms of what's their capacity once that's all installed, well, at the present moment, including their natural gas production from several just plain natural gas fields themselves that are now right now being drilled and brought into production, about 7 billion cubic feet per day, which they should reach by the end of this decade. And also, they have started a new round of oil and gas exploration licensing as well in primarily Al Anbar, this big region out here, as this is the primary chunk of Iraq that has mostly been untouched. As out of all the Persian Gulf nations, Iraq is the one that has had the least amount of oil and gas exploration. Uh, Only about 60% of the country has been surveyed to some degree, let alone actually like thoroughly explored by the oil industry. And even still, only among that 50 to 60% has been enough to where what is known there thus far is enough to have Iraq being capable, once now that they're finally shaking off any idea of obeying Saudi Arabia anymore, being capable of somewhere between 6 and 7 million barrels per day. Although it would take some time to get up there, and it has taken some time, as back in 2021, I think, is when I first said they were beginning to actually start working on additional expansion stuff. And they're now this year close to completing several of that stuff. And also, 300,000 barrels per day is also just shut down because of, disputes with Turkey, because it's, Kurdish oil. So that's plus all of the new capacities and that new big field up there being drilled combined will very shortly be adding will be taking them in capacity, their total ability of what they could produce, their ceiling up to over 6 million barrels per day. Currently, they're holding around 4.2 and are intending to not really do that any longer. As they've said, either by the end of this year or by next year, whether Saudi Arabia wants OPEC to keep extending the production cuts or not, which they will because they need them to hide their own lack of production capability, their own internal degradation. Whether they're, you know, released from the OPEC orders or not, they're just going to dial up, and so they'll be going up 2 or over 5, and we'll probably find their ceiling somewhere around 6. Unless, of course, some stuff up here gets messed up by Turkey deciding to conduct a strategic operational maneuver or whatever they decide they want to call it at any particular moment. But exploration is now being carried out in Al Anbar, which probably, has quite a bit in it. We'll end up finding out. And also, I guess as one last thing over here, in Iran, they're really down spiraling. Like, they're really down spiraling. They, on orders from Tehran, I guess from the supreme leader or supreme spiritual leader himself, whatever the Ayatollah, that's the title. They are now uninstalling all urinals from male bathrooms across the country because urinals are apparently un-Islamic and are a sign of submission to the decadent West. Okay, that's interesting. I'm sure that's going to salvage the situation in the country. Getting rid of the urinals. That's going to turn things around. And then we'll swing over to one of the actual title items. First, I'll check chat, see if there's anything else there. There's not. Everybody left, anyways. All right, what did you leave for this time? Usually it's if I start talking about Canada, that makes everybody leave for some reason. I didn't even mention Canada this time. So, here in Brazil, down in Rio Grande do Sul, hopefully not where Volkswagen lives, one of the more frequent chatters we have here on the channel. I'm hoping he lives somewhere else because huge chunks of this region have been inundated by massive flooding. Displacement of people is getting somewhere close to 500,000. There's only a few hundred fatalities, but the displacement level is massive, and also crop damage, agricultural damage, industrial and like city and business damage is also massive because places like a lot of places in and around Porto Alegre are under in some cases 10 meters of water, which doesn't really end well for most structures. So that has been ongoing and is going to continue because their forecast calls for more heavy rain over the course of the preceding week onwards from this one. So that's not over. The only upside to the massive rain Brazil's been getting has been in the north, where the Amazon River was actually at its lowest level in 127 years previously. However, the massive deluges up there have reversed that. It's not back up to its normal levels, but it has restored the water flow in the Amazon by a decent amount. However, down in the south of Brazil, though, it's been causing massive flooding and immensely horrendous devastation. So total like damages and stuff from this and its like lasting impact is not really going to be known for quite some time because we're gonna have to wait till the rain stops and then until all the water's receded to be able to like go around and assess everything. So, you have hundreds of thousands of people who are now either in the more blessed, more fortunate cases, having to cram into like some extended family's apartment somewhere, but in most cases are just having to pile in groups of like 100 into random shelters or random buildings wherever they've been set up. And there are people like obviously still missing and everything, so searching is going on for that. The image I put in for the thumbnail was one of many from the general area. This Wherever this in particular was from was one of the better off areas because those roads they are down basically on ground level and they're not underwater. So this obviously isn't one of the 10-meter deep areas, but there are quite a number of those. Basically, you can just look up. You're free to see any of the horrendous pictures yourself, or go looking for them. I mean, like here you go. For example, for like the scale of what we're talking about, those are the tops of houses, obviously, around somewhere around Porto Alegre. Here's an even worse one. Oops, that is not what I meant to click on. Here's an even worse one where it's even higher up. The street lights are still apparently working. Somehow the power did not get cut yet. But yeah, you can see all that's down. And the airport in Porto Alegre is obviously shut down because it's underwater, not by 10 meters, but by a couple meters. And that's, been making it difficult to like fly people and or supplies in and out of the region. So most stuff is having to come down by land up until it gets to like flooded areas and then get onto boats or like speed rafts and go that way, or come down by boats and like come into this big giant lagoon thing and then come up through that way into the port region. And no specifics, at least that I was able to find, on like the extent of crop damage, like in terms of total, like the total supply hit to what Brazil's like percentage output would be. So I'm uncertain of that in that particular regard. So Brazil is having a not fun time. It's having a Brazil time. And before we switch over to Russia, Ukraine to end everything out, one more positive economic development stuff, or technically two, as the world continues looking to expand its non-China based steel production capacity. Yet another steel mill is now going to be under construction in Mexico. There are three at the moment that I know of. One is 3 million tons a year, another will be 2 million tons a year. I don't know how much this third one will be, it wasn't specified. However, it's extremely rare to have one that is less than 1 million tons per year, so it will probably be at least a 1 million ton per year capacity steel mill. And also, another new semiconductor computer processor manufacturing plant is being built, this time being built in Mexico. Uh, this one is, just starting, so it's not going to be completed until like 2030 or so, versus the ones in Arizona and Ohio, which I believe are either being completed this year or already were completed and should be starting soon. The new ones in Malaysia are some of the others that should be starting up soon, along with an additional expansion in Germany, one in India, one in Turkey, although we might end up having problems with that one soon enough. And now also, there are two more additional new semiconductor plants or semiconductor fabs under construction, one in Poland and one in the Czech Republic. So that supply is finally continuing to diversify. Uh, back at the start of the 2010s, it was 90% of all silicon wafers, all computer processors were made in Taiwan. As of this year, it is down to only about 55 or 60%. And hopefully, as I believe the next in line are the ones in Malaysia and Germany, are able to hopefully switch on before the invasion next year, unless China decides to go for it this year, which by all means they could. Hopefully, that will be enough to get it down to 50 or just under 50% before the invasion actually takes place. All right, now that is all that we have in that regard. Was there anything else? No. Okay, so down over here, as titled, Russia has initiated a diversion of sorts. They have started diving across the border into the Kharkiv region up here in this little alcove thing. So the extent of which and the reason for which will, hold on, both be shown when we look at my progression map. So actually, hold on. Start from, did I delete the old ones? Oh, okay, no. So this is obviously, this is how everything began. Then the fallback, uh, where's that? Oh yeah, that was the Snake Island thing. Fallback, Kharkiv pushback, Kherson pushback, the Ukrainian re-seizure of this little tiny peninsula thing that Russia has not really tried to reclaim since, so they don't seem to care about it, at least for the time being. The initial 2023 offensive stuff that did these punches right here. The what the? I think I'm missing a few things. Okay, well, then there was also, okay, I need to add these on the previous one. So up here before these changes, most recent ones, there were these little slivers that have been taken and reheld by Ukrainian forces on this bank, the eastern side over here of the Dnipro River, that Russia has seemingly given up on trying to dislodge. And then this progression here is the what I call the post Avdiivka progression, or since the start of all the Donetsk suicide charge tactics. And this is what Russia has managed, this area here, over the last three, hold on, three, five, 7 or 5, yeah, okay, so 7 or 8 months or so. This is what they managed to get. Ignore that. That was not a pushback. That was just me correcting the map. So their positions were actually always right here. They weren't actually up as far as they were in this one. So that was not a pushback or anything. That was just a map correction. But so in here, these little bits are what they've managed to take over 8 months of throwing, tens of thousands of dudes to their deaths and throwing away hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles. And so, because of that, because of how really slow and poor this is going, they decided to try this diversion up here. So, these little bits you see up where the mouse cursor is, that is where they have done a insertion at the moment. And the most likely, in my outlook slash basically anyone with military thinking on Twitter's outlook, and I don't mean Twitter people, I mean actually like people with military thinking who have Twitter accounts. There's an important distinction there, along with Ukraine's own outlook. along with even the Z patriots or the Z radicals in Russia, who are all about like yes, invade Ukraine, exterminate Ukraine, and everything. Everyone's in relative conclusive agreement that this is primarily a distraction uh, to try, since Kharkiv, the city, is pretty close to the border. Uh, it's probably a distraction of sorts to try to cause enough alarm to get Ukraine to relocate at least some amount of forces out of Donetsk so that Russia can try progressing a bit faster than just, this little grab over the last 8 months. Since, as I've said before, grabbing the rest of Donetsk Oblast is probably what Putin and the Russian MOD's goal is now. Now that at least the MOD, not maybe necessarily Putin in reality, but is grabbing the rest of Donetsk is kind of what they now realize is the only remaining like tangibly realistic possibility they could go for. And also that's like one of the few things they could present domestically to the audience at home as them having won the war by falling back on the excuse of, well, actually, it was just about Luhansk and Donetsk the entire time. Actually, all the other stuff we invaded up there and down here, we never really cared about any of that. It was all about this the entire time. They could try to sell that as a victory excuse. However, you know, they they need to actually seize the entirety of Donetsk to pull that off, or at least a decent enough bit of it, which they probably determined this as not yet being a decent enough of it. And they, if they continued at this present pace, it would take like 5 to 6 years to continue grabbing the rest of Donetsk Oblast, which is not a timetable that Putin probably wants to work with, and also at the loss rate that they're accruing in these like bonsai charges, not something they could actually like hold up doing indefinitely, as many of these axes down here that they're attacking from, they are literally using actual like golf carts and ATVs, like the four-seater ATVs that rednecks like ride around in the mud with in the southern U.S. states. They're literally using those to conduct, like kamikaze infantry charges to try to seize positions. So they're starting to uh, wear their numbers thin in vehicle availability, not their total numbers. They still do, at least in the terms of ancient like 1950s and 60s Soviet stuff that they are pulling out of storage and restoring into some version of functionality. They still do have a lot, but they seem to have hit a physical like wall, a limit with how quickly they can actually like get it out there. Thus, you know, again, not all of these attack vectors, but some of them, I think like about a third of them, having to resort to literally using golf carts and just trucks, like generic passenger vehicles to make these attack moves. So, and also, of course, the factory that was restoring old ancient like T-62s and T-55 tanks, uh, that was severely damaged in a explosion of unknown origin last month. Not believed by either Russia or Ukraine or me to actually have been like Ukrainian sabotage or anything. That was probably another case of stuff in Russia actually does just tend to blow up a lot for reasons of just really bad safety practices, because that also happened before the war started. That was also actually still frequent in Russia, particularly at ports and at oil storage sites. Stuff would just spontaneously explode, and also something similar just happened recently as well. since I mentioned ports, over here in on the Kamchatka Peninsula, one of their ports uh, somehow caught massively on fire, and like a huge portion of the ports and everything that was in the ports all just went up in flames, and like the unloading cranes and stuff that unload ships, kind of eventually buckled in when the metal deformed enough not to liquefy or anything, obviously, but enough to where they started leaning over and they're not exactly usable. So that stuff also does just happen. What are you doing? Google Earth, stop. Obey me. You are a piece of software. So the whole thing with their new Kharkiv action is particularly because of how close Kharkiv is to the border, probably diversionary to create a sense of alarm and get Ukraine to pull at least some amount of forces out of Donetsk to try to make the whole suicide charging easier here, and create a scenario where the Russian MOD thinks they could grab the rest of the Donetsk Oblast in less than 5 or 6 years, as Putin would then be waiting until 2030, and by which, even outside of anything else happening internally or just with his own personal health, he would stand a decent enough chance of potentially just being natural causes dead by then. So up here, and part of the indicator of this not exactly being like a serious wanting to grab Kharkiv thing is the fact that they are not really using, they're barely using any vehicles in it. For the most part, let me scroll down. For the most part, can we get a bigger image? Okay, yeah. For the most part, it's just infantry that they're sending across the border, and a huge chunk is literally just going across on foot. There are some getting accompanied by some old BMP ones and stuff, but it is a lot of just infantry. But they're doing it with waves of like 1,400 guys at a time, and the casualty suffering is kind of exactly what you would expect it is, but it's Russia and they've never exactly cared. And also we have further developments. More oil refineries and depots have been hit, and also not confirmed whether this was hit by anything yet or whether it just blew up on its own. But they a chemical plant in Chuvashia. Let's switch maps here. Let's go to my stuff that has been uh, blown up or spontaneously blew up on its own map, and portions of Russia that are flooded like Brazil map. So every blacked out area, some growing larger as continuing neighboring subregions within each oblast, are also having local depots or refineries taken out by drone strikes. So some of them are enlarging, and also new ones are just appearing. Uh, you might not photographically remember like exactly where each one was like the last time you saw this, but in general, you should be able to just see the gradually like growing amount and growing cluster. So there was a new refinery hit in Volgograd. There was further oil storage down here near the ports in Krasnodar, and it's not marked on this map because this is a Russian oblast's map, but there was some field storage stuff and some depots hit in the occupied region within Luhansk Oblast, which is, not good because, you kind of you want the stuff that your resupply trucks are going to get to be like within a short enough drive to the front so that when you want to resupply your fronts, the drive isn't too long. Whereas the further stuff is getting pushed back, the more these depots go down and or refineries, the longer and from farther away said supply trucks and fuel trucks are going to having to be taking the stuff from, which means the initial like time frame from when, say, one particular Russian group is like running out of fuel and requests some more, versus the how long after that they actually receive what they asked for. That time frame is going to continuously get larger. And also, there was a new hit on a refinery in Bashkiri, all the way over here, as Ukraine's self-developed drones have now gotten quite an extensive range to them, as they've gotten this far, and also in Tatarstan. This was not a drone hit. This was a large refinery complex in Orenburg that was taken out by the flooding in that region. So that one was not Ukraine. That one was just water. And then now in Chuvashia, as I showed in that tweet of a video clip from the site, a chemical plant has been hit, or might have just blown up on its own. Not entirely certain yet. However, that was a somewhat critical one. It was one of the ones that makes a decent amount of rubber within the country, and also not necessarily something from a military angle, but something from a financial angle for Russia's government revenue. It was one of the chemical plants responsible for manufacturing a decent bit of Russia's mine leaching and ore refining chemicals, as the various different mining processes for different ore, from nickel to gold to iron to everything. Each one has different processes that the ore goes through in its refining process, and some use different types of chemicals. Some use more than others. Some use different types of acids, and decent bit of those for the Russian mining industry were made at this plant here. So that is not necessarily directly a military hit, but it is a revenue hit, at least propagating sort of down the chain. And I believe that's all the new ones, unless one I feel. Oh yeah, I forgot there was one. There was one more depot that was also hit in Belgorod. So the supply of those is starting to contract. This is okay. This is bookmarks, and also whether it was uncertain whether it was a drone strike or whether due to sabotage. But a train was derailed. I'm not going to play the footage, just in case there's dead bodies. I don't want to get TOS'd. But a train carrying military supplies was derailed somewhere in Volgograd, and not just derailed, but in the process, two of the fuel tanks exploded. So the stuff that it was carrying also can't really be recovered because it kind of got either fire damaged or exploded. And also, the tracks there, for the moment at least, are kind of screwed. And the train itself, the engine, the locomotive itself, is kind of out of commission, obviously. So that also happened. And the explosions damaged the pantograph structure, since in that area they are electric trains. They run under the overhead lines using the pantograph connection, and the overhead lines, the pantograph lines and stuff were damaged to some extent by that. We actually look at the look sheet here. Uh, did we have anything else? Oh yeah, also two Su-25s and an Su-34 have gone down recently, after a bit of a lull, and that's sorry, there over here where they're doing most of their stuff. Uh, Probably, because it's not exactly going as fast as they would like. So apart from starting that diversion up there in Kharkiv, they're also starting to risk their aviation more and are starting to send in ground bombing or ground support aircraft to try to help with help make it less suicidal for the suicide charging tactics to actually go somewhere. But doing so, obviously puts them in range of getting struck. And so three of them have been struck over the last week and a half. Two Su-25s and one Su-34. And uh, it is partly also something like in favor of it likely being a diversionary tactic, apart from, it being much more likely that Russia wants to grab the rest of Donetsk and use that as a bailout excuse. And also the fact that, it's literally just infantry that are being sent across here, which if you were legitimately trying to actually make an offensive with that, that would be kind of not the best idea. So also another indicator is that, I mean, it is making Ukraine, have to deploy more force up to the Kharkiv region because obviously, so they were transferring several units, several of their CV operating units. Hold on. How far do I have to go down here? Was it really that far back? There's no way it was that far back. Maybe. No, we didn't already go past it? Hold on. Was it down here? We go past the recapping stuff. Was it down here on this page? Come on. Down. Get as close down there as I can so I won't be stopped by the arrow. I mean, it was somewhere, obviously. This. Okay, no, that was combat footage. Where was the CV-50 footage? All right, I'm starting to think it might have been. Oh, wait, we're not even 2 days back yet. Okay. This is still May 13. Okay, I'm not gonna scroll down forever. I thought it was I thought for one I bookmarked it, and I also thought it was on here, but it must have been on one of the ones that I don't usually have pulled up or anything. But anyways, so what I was going to show was some of the uh, relocation footage because they are moving units up here from the Donetsk area. Some of the CV operating units, the CV being the oh sorry, I think it's the CV 90, not 50. Yeah, this Swedish thing. Why are you showing such a tiny image? Hold on. Switch back over here. There we go. Show a real one. Thank you. So this is the CV90. It's kind of like a Swedish version of the Bradley. For those who are familiar with vehicles, even those who aren't, you're probably familiar enough with terms like the Abrams and Bradley. So it's an AFV or an IFV, which are not tanks, but they're heavily armored vehicles that carry a certain amount of infantry in the back and do have a turret with a number of stuff on it. Sometimes countermeasures, sometimes sometimes like smoke launchers, sometimes a heavy machine gun, and they do have a turret which fires usually between 20 and 30 millimeter rounds which are big, chunky fist bullets. They're not tank shells, but they're not, they're not just large bullets either. They're big. There's something in between. There's big, chunky rounds, and they are able to be rapidly auto-loaded, so they actually can fire at like 3 rounds per second. So not at the rate of a like machine gun, not however not the slow rate of a tank, but more like pop 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 pop. And they're effective enough both ways at taking out vehicles and also at just kind of murking dudes by the dozen. So they are relocating some of those units up there. So I mean, as a diversion, it is working, and I mean, it kind of has to because you can't not relocate stuff up there when that starts happening. Uh, in terms of like effect on speed, the speed boost that somewhat forced relocation is going to give to the kamikaze charging down here, uh, definitely some, but not as much as the Russian MOD is probably hoping for. But I mean, again, in their like ideal scenario where they run out of nothing and everything does continue as of current for however many years it takes, that uh, they probably managed to cut it from 5 to 6 years down to 4 to 5 years. So you know we'll see how that all goes, except we won't, because it's not going to be able to actually get that far, as they because they, as of this present moment, have hit the 4,500 mark in terms of their losses of, thus expenditure of their AFVs and IFVs from their modern fleet, their fleet of modern ones, aka BMP 3s, BMP 2s, and BTR A's, I think is the term for BTRs that have, a controllable auto turret on top of them. They've lost 4,500 out of a starting pre-war fleet of 5,600, and about plus 150 on top of that they were able to manufacture for a few months once they actually started that IFE plant over in Orenburg before the plants got taken out by the flooding in Orenburg. So they're not producing any new ones. So they're getting, dangerously close with their number thinning on there. And thus, the videos you're now starting to see are quickly in proportion starting to be more and more the ancient BMP ones and stuff. In terms of total losses of their ancient salvaged Soviet vehicles, those are up to about 900. And then in total, just generality, this is for IFEs and AFEs, tanks, artillery, and everything. For old Soviet stuff in storage that is getting pulled out of like ancient storage lots in Siberia and stuff. Based on, as of the end of last year, start of this year, based on the satellite imagery that was available from companies that actually let you pay for a subscription to get updated satellite imagery like on a daily basis, as opposed to not money having people like me who have to rely on free stuff like Google Earth, which their images are from 2013. But as of the uh, data that was visible in those images at the start of this year, Russia had gone through about 40% of what was in the storage sites, which, like I said when I first brought that up, if you applied that relative time frame math from when they started drawing stuff out up to the start of this year, and that resulting in a 40% draw, and you then drew that out, you would get math working out to them going through the entire old reserve stuff or at least stuff that's worth touching. I mean, by all means, they could actually legitimately try sending T-34s into combat, but that wouldn't really end all that well. Just like how the T-55s in combat is already not ending very well. But that math would work out to them running through those in summer of next year would be when you would expect to hit the final wall in those, which is also about the same time frame, ironically, that Russia would finalize expending its reserve saved up money that it had in the Russian National Wealth Fund, and effectively then uh, that would be a wall unless they decided to start selling off all of their gold reserves that their federal bank holds, which I mean they could, and they could get billions of dollars off of that. However, that just is not the brightest thing to do. And if you suddenly did that, then that would, that would sort of cut the ribbon of the lie that everything's fine. And even internally, everyone would realize that, this thing is coming down, and the whole thing would financially spiral. So I would, assume that they kind of really want to try to have this done before reaching that point, but it's just not exactly going to go that way. Do we have anything else on the list here? Depots, refineries, chemical factory, Kharkiv, numbers, Chuvashia. No, it looks like that's it. Or at least for the Russia-Ukraine stuff. There is one other thing I forgot to hit back when we were talking about the Middle East. So, dealing with Saudi Arabia, everybody's favorite. Hold on, let me check chat first. Hello, everybody. Tonight is definitely a dead chat night. So Saudi Arabia, you know, already, as I've said, they're going to reach the end of their capability to maintain a 10 million barrel per day plateau by around 2032. And they're already, this whole permanent OPEC production cuts regime is already them trying to preemptively get the world psychologically used to them pumping at lower numbers, anyways, so that, they can just pass it off as normal when stuff starts to actually decline. And they, even if even if they if that was not the case, if they were not coming to the edge of their capability very soon, they have kind of thrown their ability to, maybe do any stalling of that decline out the window, because they're a Saudi Aramco, their state-run company that does all that. Now that it's an investor corporation, take a guess who most of its investors are. Who's holding most of the shares? It couldn't possibly be the Saudi royal family, could it? So, and the other Saudi government officials. So, the the company Saudi Aramco, turns out they're not spending money on upkeep and stuff, or on any attempts at enhanced recovery operations at any of their fields. They are dumping their expenditure, and I wonder who made this decision. They are dumping their free capital expenditure that they have on hand into paying out shareholder dividends. They are literally throwing out this year $124 billion in shareholder dividend payouts. Again, I wonder who. I wonder who those shareholders really are. So they're not even spending their free capital on oil and gas stuff. They're spending it on giving the Saudi royal family, monetary handouts. Just like how, the Line project up in the Northwest, their whole Neom City thing, was a project. It was literally a scheme meant to give themselves money because the Saudi royal family owns the construction company that got contracted to build Neom, and they, awarded the company a $500 billion contract to build Neom. However, that company, is owned by the royal family, so it's literally just a means of them transferring the government's money to themselves without just blatantly transferring the government's money to themselves to their own bank accounts. So, even if they were actually still capable of maintaining higher oil production for longer, they're definitely not actually trying to. They're not putting the financial resources into making any attempts to do that. They're just handing themselves the money instead. So that's where all that's going. And that is the actual end of everything that we have for this time. So I'll wait in case there's any if there's any messages, questions, or super chats or anything from chat. I'll wait and answer those. I think there's usually a 20 or 30-second delay before anybody hears anything. So I'll wait for the 30 seconds while I drink some water. Otherwise, that's going to be the end of the stream. And I will try over the rest of this week to put out several additional videos, the regular like monthly data videos like OPEC oil production levels, uh, the monthly updated, oil demand levels of each country and everything. I'll also be doing another, uh, even though I'll be speaking very quickly in that video and trying to do it in a rapid fire style. It'll still be a long video. I will be, just because of the sheer amount of stuff in it, I will be doing a video called "The Natural Resources of Every Country," where I'm literally going basically just in a list format while rapidly flipping through images of each type of like ore that I mention and stuff. I will be going down a rapid list of almost every country and listing off the natural resources, whether like oil and gas or whether certain metals and minerals that the country has in a sizable amount, in a sizable enough amount at least. Like, I'm not going to mention for example, Albania. The only thing on Albania's list is chromium because it does have some deep earth deposits of chromium ore. Even though Albania does have a few oil fields and produces like 14,000 barrels per day of oil, that's only 14,000 barrels per day. That's not enough to qualify for me to list Albania as having oil as one of its natural resources, because with those tiny numbers, it effectively doesn't. So, but that's going to be a thing I'm going to try to work on later this week. And even though I'm going to be, like I said, speaking through it very fast, trying to just list everything off, it's still going to probably end up being really long just because, there's almost 200 countries to go through. Although a lot of the island nations will be getting skipped because they don't really have anything. And there's nothing else from chat then. So that will be it. And I will see everybody.